Hello, everyone. I am Yifei, and I'm again from the marketing group. So the topic of my presentation is competition and privacy. And the key research question I'm trying to address in this paper is whether more competition leads to more or less privacy intrusion by firms. Now, before we dive in, let's first discuss why it is so important to understand privacy from a competition perspective. So there are some scary statistics. So on average, a mobile phone is located by apps over 3,000 times per day, and our photos and files data are accessed by apps over 2,000 times per day. And so that suggests that privacy intrusion is a huge challenge faced by consumers in our mobile economy today. And so a natural question here is, why are things so bad? And why is privacy not being supplied in the market? Now, regulators all over the world are now increasingly concerned that insufficient competition has privacy protection. So, for example, in the US, the antitrust regulators, the Department of Justice and FTC, has been suing Google and Meta for providing insufficient privacy protection due to their market power. And in Europe, the European Court of Justice recently supported the German antitrust regulators that Facebook had been abusing its market power to harvest user data. So basically, regulators all over the world believe that more competition is going to help privacy protection. And this idea can be illustrated in this recent New York Times article, which basically reported that almost simultaneously with Google's exit from the social media market, Facebook started to decrease its privacy protection for its consumers. However, there are also some counter arguments. So, for example, a recent research report suggested that more competition will not help if the competition itself is toxic. Now, if rival firms compete to exploit users by getting users more addicted and by collecting more user data, more competition is not going to actually help privacy protection. And the regulators believe that more competition will help privacy is also actually contradicting with the observation in the media and in the literature that large firms actually tend to collect less sensitive data and tend to invest more on privacy protection. So how exactly competition helps privacy is unclear. And despite the huge amount of attention in the media and in the policy debate, it is almost completely unstudied in the empirical literature on privacy. So this is going to be the focus of this paper. Now let's look at the context. So I'm studying this in the context of the Chinese Android app market. And this market is a bit different from the app market in other countries in the sense that in the US, for example, people download Android apps from Google Play. But Google Play is banned in China, so we have to use other app stores, which we will call the third-party Android app stores. And so the platform we're studying is from a major third-party Android app store in China, and this is a leading player, so that the apps we look at is going to be a representative set of the apps that are available to Chinese consumers. Now, what does privacy mean in this context? So here I'm going to define the degree of privacy intrusion as the number of permissions requested per app. So if an app is requesting more permissions, I'm going to think of it as being more privacy intrusive. And now this is because the number of permissions represent the level of data access and the degree of device control requested by an app. And it's important to notice that requesting permissions is different from requesting user consent because most permissions in the Android system are going to be approved by the Android system automatically, and they do not go through the users. And only for a small subset of permissions that Android think are particularly dangerous to privacy, they will take this permission so the user can decide whether to deny or grant this permission. So my paper, I'm going to look at both the total number of permissions and the subset of particularly dangerous permissions defined by Android. All right, now what does competition mean in this context? So here, competition basically means the degree of concentration in the market. And I'm actually going to look at the policy shock that both reduced the number of players and increased the market concentration in the trading markets. So identification. Now, the key challenge here is how to understand the causal effect of competition on privacy. And that is challenging because competition in the market is almost always endogenous in the sense that there are also factors that can both affect competition and firms' privacy intrusion at the same time, such as market size, product features. And so my identification strategy comes from the sad fact that the competitive environment in Chinese ad market is affected by internet censorship. So in 2003, China launched the Golden Shield project, and a part of this project, some of the most popular global websites and their apps are banned, including Google, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. But Chinese people are smart. So despite this internet censorship, people can still use these banned apps with additional censorship circumvention tools, such as the VPNs. Now, however, in 2017, there was a new regulation that prohibits this tool, such as VPNs, that are not authorized by the government. And this 2017 policy is going to be a key focus of my research here. So this is a summary of how this policy shock interacts with the competitive environment in Chinese ad market. And so on the top of the figure here is the uncensored categories. So think about bank apps and weather apps here. Now, the apps in these categories are permitted both before and after the policy shock. So they're not really affected by this policy shock. Now, the bottom of this figure are the censored categories. So think about chat apps or music apps, for example. Now, the banned apps in the censored categories. So think about Spotify, for example. Now, the banned apps are banned. But before the policy shock, they can actually still be used with VPNs. Now, after the policy shock, the VPNs are banned. So even though the Spotify is still there, people can hardly use it because they can hardly access the VPNs. Now, the permitted apps in the censored categories, so think about the Chinese music apps, for example. And so these apps are permitted both before and after the policy shock. But before the policy shock, they're facing competition from their foreign competitors, such as Spotify. And after the policy shock, they're facing a removal of competition. So in my paper, I'm going to use the permitted apps in the censored categories, the apps down there, as a treaty group, as they're facing a removal of competition. And I'm going to use the permitted apps in the uncensored categories, so the guys up there, as a control group, as their competitive environment did not change. So this is just some summary of the evidence of the policy change. So the first figure here basically shows that there's a sharp increase in the number of popular VPNs that were removed from the Chinese ad market. And the second figure basically shows that the policy change indeed lead to an increase in market concentration of the treated or the censored markets, measured by the average Heffendahl index. All right. So the brief introduction of the data and model here. So the key data challenge here is how to get historical data on app permissions. And so the way I overcome this challenge is that I find a third-party Android platform that provides historical versions of apps. And then I obtain a list of apps, and then I downloaded all the historical versions of all these apps from this platform. So I end up downloading over 300,000 app installation packages. And as you see, my goal is to really become the PhD student who downloaded the largest number of apps. And so then I analyze these app installation packages directly to get data on permissions and app functions and revenue model. I also use a censorship data set here and define a category as being censored if there is any censored app before the treatment. So the model I use is synthetic different-diff, which is actually quite similar to conventional different-diff. And as we'll see in the result, how it works. It works pretty well, actually. So this is just a comparison of the treated group and the synthetic control group before this policy shock. And the y-axis here is the average number of permissions requested per app. And as we see before the policy shock, this actually matched pretty well. But after the policy shock, we see a huge difference, which suggests that the removal of competition leads to an increase in the number of permissions requested by the treated group. And it also means an increase in their privacy intrusion. And so here's some examples of the permissions that are actually affected by this policy shock. Now, the key takeaway from this figure is that the effect actually comes from a wide range of different permissions instead of from a specific type of permission. Now, this is how the effect varies across app genres or markets. So as we see, the largest effect comes from the communication and social category, which is just the chat apps, social media apps, and so forth. Now, finally, the mechanism. So, to understand why this is the case, we still need to answer two additional questions. So I answered both of them, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to stop here and just briefly introduce what these are. So basically, the first question I answered is what is the purpose of the increased permission request and why are firms requesting these additional permissions? And the second question I answered is why does the decrease in competition amplify the incentives for apps to request these permissions? So how the competition change apps incentives. And I'll just stop here and keep this as a mystery. And so if you're interested, please come talk to me after the presentation. All right, thank you.